My name is Jeremy, and this is Good Beer Matters.
Craft beer has had a wave in all the regions around the world, except for the Middle East. I'm very into, I guess you could say, the chefification of craft beer. I have the world of cultures to play with when it comes to flavors.
The middle of a desert may be the last place you'd find a brewery, but it's the best place to find a drink. Except, in this desert, there's a vast mix of cultures, affluence, and a complicated relationship with alcohol. My next guest has navigated through the challenges to create a brewery with a taste of the Middle East. We find great experiences at the intersection of craft and culture. These are the stories of us, of great food and the beer that brings it all together. For the craft and culture of beer, this is episode 125 of Good Beer Matters with Chad McGehee of Side Hustle Brews. Hey, so today we get to virtually, keyword there is virtually, travel across the world into a culture that I don't have very much experience with. My best understanding is alcohol and this culture have not historically gotten along all that well, to put it, euphemistically. Let's try saying that 5 times fast. I'm sure it gets better after a beer. But Chad, welcome to the Good Beer Matters podcast. I can't wait to dive into your story and your location and just really learn the culture of where you are and what you're doing.
All right, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
First things first, will you please just introduce yourself and tell us, who are you, what do you do, and what's your background in beer?
So my name's Chad McGehee. I'm the founder, owner one of a group of owners of Side Hustle Brews and Spirits. We are the first craft alcohol brand to launch in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. I'm originally from a small town south of New Orleans. Most of my partners are from the US, but I've been an expat for about 19 years now. So I've lived across the world, South Asia. I spent 2 years in Nigeria, and then I spent the last about 12 years in the UAE, across Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So mostly, overseas my adult life. And it's just, I started Side Hustle in 2018, 19, end of 18, early 19, just as a way for me and my friends to get better beer. So if you look at the timeline of that, there's certain styles of beer that were just really blowing up in America, just getting into Europe, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not, being sent to the Middle East for various reasons.
Yeah.
And we got tired of paying, $20 for a Heineken when the rest of the world's paying $6 for hazy IPAs and pastry stouts and everything else that people were really getting into. So we were, told we were having a meeting about another company we were starting, and I was like, hey, why don't we just bolt on a brewery to it? Like, we got to figure out a way to get beer here. And I'm sure if we could do it in a proper way, then people enjoy it. Worst case, we get better beer. So our first batches of beer, the goal was very simple: make the freshest beer we could possibly make, and get it in the country. So we were air freighting everything, from about 6 hours after it was packaged. It was at the airport, and then it was flown in, and then first hazy IPA ever to hit the country. Something that fresh, it just took off. The company's been going very well. We've grown, we've doubled every year over the last 4 years. And we're now available in 36 countries, I think it is. So we've become very much an expat and international focused brewery, on the back of being aggravated that we were overpaying for international lager.
Interesting. Well, you just wonderfully just laid out the entire overview of everything we're going to talk about. So I'm gonna go through and start kind of picking some of that story apart a little bit. First of all, how did you end up becoming an expat and being a world traveler?
So I graduated from LSU in 2005. LSU has a couple of programs that are world renowned, one of which is internal auditing. I graduated from that program, went to work at IBM. After a brief stint, went to American Express in Manhattan, and then got a call back from IBM saying like, "Hey, we have a job opening in Asia. We need to put some Americans on the auditing team. Would you be willing to go?" Yes. So packed my bags. I moved that October of 2007, and haven't looked back. So my first 4 years, I literally traveled around South Asia between India and New Zealand. Every month I was in a different country. I had two bags, and I never went home. So it was kind of called a 100% travel job. We didn't have a house. We just went country to country, city to city, for 4 years, and it was quite an experience. But you do get burnout. So then at the end of being burnout, I was offered another role within IBM to go and help open 17 offices in Africa. So they're like, "Hey, we have a job." I said, "Can I have one house?" So, yes, you can have one house. I was like, "All right, where is it?" It's Nigeria. So it's like, "Do you want to go visit?" It's like, "Nah, let's just go to Nigeria." Um, so we moved to Lagos, and then it was also a very unique, good experience. And as I look back on it, there's a lot of what we do now with beer and what we've learned about production and shipping and all that was informed by my stint in Lagos and watching the shipping industry and like how everything it goes through in a country like that, and then how do you have to manage logistics. So then at the end of a couple of years in Nigeria, my wife got a job in Abu Dhabi. And after bringing her to Nigeria, I told her you get to pick any country in the world you want to go to, and we'll travel. So she got Abu Dhabi. IBM moved me here. I was here about 10 years with them, and then decided that hey, IT services is no longer for me. Let's open a distillery and a brewery, and focus on the Middle East, which was a bunch of things that nobody's ever done before. So everybody looked at me like I was crazy, but 4 years later, it's starting to work out, and we think we kind of hit a wave. Every craft beer has had a wave in all the regions around the world except for the Middle East. And we like to think that we're starting to push that wave here. Like some of the breweries in Thailand and Vietnam are doing in Asia. Like all the big guys that have done in the U.S. and also the breweries that shall not be named in the UK and the rest of Europe as well.
Again, you've given me so many openings for questions. I'm struggling to figure out where to go. But uh, I, so you've traveled all through Asia, Africa, now the Middle East. And can I fairly assume that you've been a beer drinker through all of it?
Not really.
Not really.
It's
Okay.
pretty funny. I often tell people here, in the UAE, until recently, beer is very expensive. And when I got here, it was you find the liquor store because that's what everybody does. When something is sort of restricted, I mean, it wasn't really restricted, but as long as you were an expat, you can get a license, you can go to the store, you can buy whatever you want. But we didn't know where the stores were. Go in, get a couple of cases of beer. When we finally find them, they both expired in my house. So it was just like it wasn't. It was there, drinking every now and then. It wasn't really a big thing. I'm much more of a whiskey spirits kind of guy. But then over time, the more we traveled, especially back to the States, like over that period between 2011 kind of to now, the beer itself has changed a lot. And then started getting more and more and more into it. But it really, for me, took off probably around 2016. Um, and I mean, look, at the end of the day, in Africa, there's three beers. So it wasn't, you have Tusker out of Kenya, you have Star out of Nigeria, you have Heineken, you have Guinness. So there's a few things at the time. But even now, Lagos has craft breweries. So it's, I think even Africa has that wave. So it's just kind of over time, kind of built up, but different flavor profiles. I'm very into, um, I guess you could say, the chefification of craft beer, like looking at
Yeah.
different
Yeah. Good
hops as
word.
ingredients and building recipes and doing that kind of stuff. So I do a lot of the recipe building for our company, even though our brewers are far more experienced than me at this. And then we kind of just look at what is the latest and greatest ingredient, and we try to make sure that we can bring them to the Middle East. So it's a fun adventure. But I would say 2016ish, 2015 was when I became more of a beer drinker than a spirits guy.
Well, I want to circle back around to what you just said, but even though you weren't a devout beer person necessarily, but you've traveled a bit, you're now in the beer world, and you can look back on your experiences and some of the things you had, whether it's beer or whiskey or
Yeah.
whatever you've had while you were there. Um, I'm just really curious about the offline. You and I had a little brief conversation, excuse me, and I talked about how from my point of view, from my perspective, it looks like beer culture is kind of an international culture in and of itself, but then it branches out into its own specific avenues. What did you notice that was the same, and what was uh, uh, distinctly different between the beer and drink culture from all the places that you've lived throughout the world?
So I think that most of the timing of my travels, um, if I look back on it and I look at those same countries, you look at New Zealand and everything that they're doing with craft beer. Same thing with Australia, Hong Kong. I mean, as I said, Vietnam, Thailand, like all of these places have craft breweries and they're doing great things now. When I was living in those countries, that was not the case.
Mm,
So at that point, I found that global beer culture really revolved around what we kind of talk about as American lager. Even though it wasn't American, it could be European, but it's the big macro beers is what kind of at that time everybody was doing. And I think as kind of globalization, the internet, everything, people started talking a lot more online, and then you had the forums and you had everything else. It just kind of exploded across the world. And now you can go anywhere in New Zealand and get, an American IPA, but not only just an American IPA style, but with American hops. Whereas, 15 years ago, when I was living in New Zealand, there was not the case. Like you had craft brewers, you had small guys like, I remember I met some guys at a restaurant. We were chatting, just, how do you live? Where do you go? What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, hey, you like beer? I was like, yeah, I'll have a beer. Come to my sailboat. He had a brewery on his sailboat, like just a little homebrew setup. And I was like, well, what are you doing? He's like, well, I took 2 years off of school before I started a job, and I'm just brewing beer, traveling around New Zealand, and I just dock and when I need ingredients, and then I make some new beer and I travel to the next city. And I mean, so he's just floating around two islands for 2 years and making beer, drinking beer. So like that to me was really cool. And then it's one of those things you always keep in the back pocket when you're starting to, hey, what should we do? How do we get something unique? You're like, well, just look at another place for ingredients and those kind of things. So I think the globalization, like it really has expanded in the last like 10, 15 years in this industry. Hops, particularly yeast, is even getting now. You can get West Coast yeast like from Berkeley. You can get them in Europe. You can get some of the Chicago yeast. You can get those in Europe. So it's like everything is getting. It's going. I think it's going back to what you were talking about. I think before it was pretty much international lagers everywhere,
mm.
and with their own little unique beers they were brewing. And then you had the huge wave in America, and then everybody else is starting to do their waves. I think the UK has probably had the same wave as America. They're roughly in the same period. Way too many breweries for the size location it is. You're starting to see kind of consolidation. Rest of Europe is still kind of chugging along, and then you get like South Africa is blowing up. Vietnam's blowing up, Thailand's blowing up, like all these places. But when you go there, what are they brewing with? Citra, Mosaic, Nelson. So it's all the same stuff that everybody else has. And
Yeah.
now I think it's starting to come back to one culture around the world. Like you start to see all the styles, and then you see somebody throw in, a little twist of their home culture into it, which is, where you get to be that very unique and have the spin off that you discuss.
Yeah, and I do see signs of some breweries trying to create a sense of place once again, whether it's through like a craft maltster,
Hmm.
or getting some experimental hops that because they have a good relationship with the hop grower, or whatever that may be. But or maybe it's just taking all these ingredients that we have available to us. You use the word chefification, which I really love, but I think about a chef. Um, most restaurants are getting the same produce either from the farmer's market or from the food distributor, but what they do with it is what makes
Yeah.
that restaurant really uniquely stand out. And I think that's kind of where we're going with this. We're trying to find the best ingredients, whether at the brewer's version of the farmer's market or just the general food distributor or ingredient distributor, but it's how we manifest it. But again, I want to circle back around to this. But help me understand. I've never been to the UAE. I've never been to Abu Dhabi. I honestly, I'm just going to call it duck a duck. I don't know much about it, to be frank. Will you paint the picture for us? Uh, Tell us about the geographic and the culture around that area.
I mean, look, I've lived in a lot of places. This is the most international place that I've ever been to. I mean, people talk about New York, they talk about London, um, but there's a very high percentage of locals that live in those two cities. In the UAE, you're looking at 20% of the people are from the country, 80% are from somewhere else. So you have this massive internationalization of a city. You have a bunch of people who are looking at the culture of the country and moving and buying in before they even get here, right? So I think it's very unique. There's not the squibbles and squabbles that you're seeing around the rest of the world. People come in, they build new families, meaning friends, but you know what I mean. When you're 8 to 14 hours away from your real family, the people you live with overseas become your family. Like expat culture is a bit different and unique in its own self. But in this country, yeah, I mean, look, what people see from the outside about the UAE is really it's kind of like what it is. I mean, it's a country that says, they run it with a mindset for the future, but they respect the past, and they also respect everybody else's culture whenever they come in. So, I mean, there's a new construction zone in Abu Dhabi. It's almost being built; it might even be finished now. But it's like the cultural district. So you have a Louvre museum being built. You have a Guggenheim being the Louvre's open. You have a Guggenheim being built, and then just across the street from the Guggenheim, you have a worship complex, which has an Arabic mosque, a Jewish synagogue, and a Christian church, all in the same area. They share the same parking lot and they have a park that after service they can all just go to the park and see each other, meet each other. So
Oh,
it's a
that's
push by the
incredible.
exactly. I mean, it's in the middle of the Middle East, so it's to me that's kind of mind blowing, but it is kind of that encapsulates the rest of the culture here. So no matter where you go, what you do, can you get a taste of home? Generally, like especially with food, like we can get anything from anywhere in the world because almost everything up until recently was imported. So, but it's becoming its own kind of thing. Well, at the same time, everyone who comes here, whether they're an expat or a visitor, they expect what we call the ist, the biggest, fastest, strongest, longest, shortest, tiniest, most expensive. Like is a country that wants the best, and they want to show that the best is attainable um, whenever you bring in people from all over the world. So, I mean, the last time I looked it up, there are people from 117, 120 countries here. And it's, overall population 10 million. So it's very small. And it's a lot of people from a lot of different places in a very small place that you're eating together, drinking together, going to school together, working together. So it's the cross culturalization. You do that exchange often on a daily basis, and you're
And
learning
so,
something new every day.
and so there is a lot of interaction between and across cultures as opposed to in other places like, here in the US where this culture they just kind of this is our neighborhood and that's your neighborhood. Uh, is there quite a bit of cross culturalization there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say very much so. Because again, you can't avoid it here. The population is too small, and like everybody's works together. Your kids go to school together. I mean, my kid plays little league, and you look at his team, and he's got people from 7 different countries on his team. And so you're spending 4 days a week with all of these families, and you can't help but become friends. So yeah, it's definitely a mix. Now, look, at the end of the day, on the weekends, like where people go, yes, there are still pockets based on there are some countries where they go, but I would say that's more of the exception than the rule here.
Well, with that many cultures, that many religions, that many holidays, that many beliefs and observances and all that sort of stuff, um, talk to me about the role that alcohol plays in that that melting pot. We usually use the word melting pot for America. It sounds like this is a bigger melting pot.
Yeah, I mean, look, so it's a very weird statistic, and it's probably outdated now. But a few years ago, there was a World Health Organization study that said people in the UAE drink twice as much as the US, the UK, South Africa, and Australia. So alcohol is a big part of it. It is a different drinking culture. I'm going to blame most of that statistic on the Brits, by the way. But yeah, so there's a brunch culture, there's a ladies' night culture. I mean, the F and B and the F, I will say, industry is the food industry here is very big. So you have a lot of the more famous chefs in the world have restaurants here. For obvious reasons, they can come here and build opulent restaurants and charge a fortune, and people will go whether they're on holiday or live here or whatever. The beverage industry is getting bigger. We have a lot of the world-renowned mixologists here, but for over time we hadn't really had any beer. So it's you might have 100 different beers when you walk into the store, but they're 5 beers. Like they all taste the same.
Yeah.
You get the basic lager from every country, so that's why the number is so high. But whether you're from the Philippines, Thailand, China, U.S., Europe, South Africa, your lager's here, and that's kind of the way it goes. But I mean, every Friday until recently, but recently they moved the weekends to Saturday, Sunday. So it's now it's on Saturdays. It's the brunch culture, which is you can go to any restaurant in the country, pretty much. High end, low end doesn't matter, and it's all you can eat, all you can drink for 4 or 5 hours. And then after that, it's the after parties, and I mean, at the end of the day, it is still an expat culture. So like at home, you may go out for a brunch, like in the US when I'm home, you go out to brunch and then you go home. But here it's mostly younger people, I would say. Maybe they have families, maybe they have kids, maybe they don't. But it's the weekends party time, especially in the winter when we have fantastic weather. It's unrivaled in the world. The winter in the UAE is pretty one of the best places you can be.
Mm.
Summer is a totally different story, though. So it's
Yeah, I
you
can
pay
only
for
imagine.
it. You pay for it. But yeah, so it's there. I mean, the locals can drink. It's which is so we get a lot of questions often about these kind of things, and you used to have an alcohol license to purchase alcohol as a resident. As a citizen, you could not. Recently, that has changed. At least in Abu Dhabi, there's no licenses required. Locals can purchase if they would like to purchase. The government says, "Hey, it's up to you." You know what I mean? It's between you and your God. How do you look at things and how you want to drink or not drink? Dubai is still a little bit different. You still need to have a license in Dubai, but the process is very. I mean, you can walk in with your ID, pay a fee. 10 minutes later, you have a license. So it's not a big deal.
Is
But
that
yeah,
license
it's
per
still around.
year or forever?
It's per year. It's renewable.
Gotcha.
But again, to renew it, you just have to bring your old one, pay the New Year's fee.
Yeah,
Then you end up getting some vouchers for discounts on booze, so you can get your money back. But no,
interesting.
you have alcohol stores in almost every neighborhood. Um, you know, there's in Dubai, there's two importers, two distributors, same companies that have their branded shops. In Abu Dhabi, there's about 10, I believe. So you can get anything from just a small little beer and wine store to a full blown superstore. There's a store about an hour and a half from my house that is, I mean, it's massive. It's like a Walmart of alcohol. You have thousands and thousands of products and everything everywhere in the country. Um, you know, I think they have like 10,000 wines or something in their store. Like it's crazy. So
But
it's
does that
not a,
include beer as well?
yeah, they have a bunch of beers, but like, yeah, they would historically have had the best craft beer selection. Um, but we can get into why that most of the beers here, it's not, they're not handled properly.
Yeah.
So craft beer has to be handled in a certain way to be
Hmm.
good.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, I haven't had all these beers in their home country, but I would imagine it tastes way better. But at least in the store, you can get 12 different beers, 15 from Australia. You can get 20 or 30 from the UK. You know what I mean? Like you can get a big variety. By and large, not the brands that Americans would know. But you know, you're not getting Cloudwater here from the UK. You're getting a
Yeah.
bunch of the other larger kind of craft breweries.
Well, I just worry about beer shipments in the summertime. I can only hope that they're in refrigerated trucks, but if it's as hot as I imagine is, then that's only going to go so far, and then most likely sit on warm shelves if there's that much in a single store. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm sure there are
yeah.
some issues
It's
with freshness.
There are some issues. Some of the things you described. The in the store is not an issue because it is. I mean, air conditioning is very prevalent here.
Yeah.
But yeah, the trucks is an issue. Shipping is probably the biggest issue.
Yeah, interesting. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about what you're doing. Tell me about side hustle. I mean, you're creating spirits, you're creating beer. Is Side Hustle the first craft brewery in Abu Dhabi?
Not well. There's no breweries here at this time
Okay,
because it's not legal to have, especially production breweries. But we market ourselves as the first craft brand because we did start the
okay,
brand here. We do lean in heavily into to being an expat in what we do. And the way that I tell people is we built the brand specifically to ship beer here. So I don't know of another American production company that is like we produced in America for 3 years before we sold anything into the U.S. Because we were adamant that we wanted the beer to only be available in the UAE. And so everything we produced was shipped here. All of our processes were designed around having to ship here and knowing that it could be in a container for 5 months, 5 weeks, sorry, or it could be 9 weeks because we did have a container that just randomly got dropped off in India for some reason, and then they had to pick it up. So the way that we process, the way that we package, the way that we ship, it's all met for that expat, the long journey. And then also we do tweak our recipes for that as well. So shelf life, shelf stability is very important to me, being a consumer here.
yeah,
And everything we do is kind of to dial that in. But yeah, I started the brand, as I said, just like basically I wanted a hazy IPA, couldn't get one. The easiest way was to start a brewery. It was,
There are
so
some people that might disagree with that.
hey, look, it took me 5 months. So yeah, 5 months from start to having the first shipment here, which was really cool. I partnered with a very experienced brewer out of the U.S. Wayne used to be one of the head brewers at Dogfish. He now has his own brewery. So he and I partnered on this brand. We were like, hey, let's see how far we can take it, making some really good beer. As I said, we used to air freight everything cold. So our first four shipments, we air freighted everything, lost a ton of money. But we showed the country. Again, it's an ist country, biggest, best,
Yeah.
fastest. We showed them what the freshest beer possible would taste like. It was 3 days between the time it left the brewery and the time it was on the shelf. So that's just unheard of here. And it sold out in 24 hours every time we did a shipment. So then we slowly had to get into sea freighting. And we are, to my knowledge, the only brand that ships cold into the Middle East. So every other brand ships with blankets. They do different things, but it's we're adamant we ship cold. We get a lot of conditioning on the way. I like to tell people, but at the same time, we're very focused on the cultural aspect of it because for us, we don't produce here, but we're trying to tell everybody we're local, and that is a fine line that you have to walk, and you do it by really leaning into the local culture, making that your brand culture, and then also absorbing the cultures of the other 117 to 120 countries that live here. And that's really been kind of our focus. So, like one of the things I do, you touched on it earlier, like getting local ingredients and
Yeah.
local
Yeah.
like terroir, right? So when we started, we were like, hey, we want a beer that is incredibly unique that no other brewery that's selling beer to this region can make if they even wanted to. So we went and found like a very small mom and pop hops farm in Michigan that was growing a unique hop that was developed in Michigan, and we tested a few of them. I was like, hey, this Mackinac hops, I really like it. It's pineapple flavor. It's kind of unique. It's orange. It's papaya. Our flagship beer is now that made with that hop and has been the same acre of the same farm for 4 years.
Wow.
And so we were the first brewery to export that hop. We continue to do so. It's become like an incredible um, product for us. We were able to get it onto Etihad Airways, so we're the first craft brand to get onto a Middle Eastern airline. We also use that hop in our gin. We use it in our non-alcoholic. I use it in barbecue sauces. I mean, we use it all over the world because it's unique. There's only probably a couple hundred acres of that hop in existence. And so while the other guys in Australia that are shipping here can get Citra Mosaic, they're not getting Mackinac or Michelin Copper. You know what I mean? So we try to,
Yeah.
to try to do that point of it. But at the same time, we try to bring in some of the UAE back into the beer. So once a year, we do a beer, which is our like a barrel aged stout, where we bring in local ingredients. So I'll literally load up my suitcases with 100 pounds of dates and coffee that's roasted here, or go to the spice market and get saffron and tea and different things, and we'll bring it back to the U.S. and brew, and then ship the beer back. Um, and that beer, I generally try to cram in ingredients from as many countries as possible into one beer. Our last iteration, we had 13 countries in that beer. So we call it logistical nightmare. So every year it's that's what it is. And it's usually aged in two different barrels and blended. It's just the most complicated damn thing you can do. And we sell 200 bottles. Like that's it. So it's a very limited, it's pre-sold before it arrives. And like that's kind of how it goes. But
Well,
it's one of those things we do for the expats.
and I would imagine that probably is the cheapest way to get all those ingredients there is just for you to buy a ticket and do that long ride home and go
Exactly.
visit
Because I
and
want to be home to brew it anyway. So,
yeah.
um, in the first 2 years when we were open, I flew back every time we did packaging because that's when the problems are going to occur.
Yeah.
And if there's somebody that wants to work 24 hours a day on something like that, it's the owner of the company. It's
Yeah.
not going to be. It's not going to be the contract production team. They're not going to put in the effort that you don't expect them to.
Yeah.
But now it's starting to go back. I'm starting to leave that. We've kind of nailed that portion. So now I'm going back and bringing ingredients and helping to make the beers and doing that kind of stuff.
So what has been so obviously it's worked because it sounds like it's been selling really well. Just kind of pulling a couple different
Hmm.
side comments you made, but let's just lean into a little bit. How was everything received as far as I mean you're talking about hops? I think you said Michigan, right?
Yeah.
And then ultimate. So we're not getting a true taste of Abu Dhabi until you bring all those ingredients back with you to brew with them, and then ship everything back. So now we're getting a
Mhm.
taste of it. What has been the response to this kind of a quote unquote local beer?
Initially, people thought we were joking. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a can here. We have, I mean, the camel's our logo. We have them on the
Yeah.
cans. It is a kitschy thing that a lot of companies try to do when they come out to the Middle East. But I think from us talking to locals that enjoy our product, um, and by locals, I mean citizens of the country. They read the story and they're like, wow, they're serious. Like, this is not mocking us. You know what I mean? Like, they're doing it out of respect. I mean, for us, there's a couple of things that are off limits when it comes to beer that we won't talk about, we won't put on a can, we won't put in our advertising or anything. Camels seem to be okay. Falcons, moons, these other kind of sensitive symbols, we stay away from because again, we respect the culture. But for this one, it was something that stood out for us. Initially, we wanted it to be I mean, it is a symbol for the rest of the world of the Middle East. And we
Hmm.
wanted this beer to be known as a Middle Eastern product, even though we're not producing here. So yeah, it was received very well. I mean, initially it was just flavor. Like, people were just wild that you can get a beer that tastes, because I said most of them are shipped hot. They're
Yeah.
sitting in warmish warehouses. They're sitting in hot retail stores overnight, and then you put it in your fridge. I mean, it's skunked at the end of the day before you even drink it. So just getting freshness, people were wild. They were like, "Yeah, but it's expensive." And then I started telling them it's cheaper here than in America, even though we're shipping around the world cold. There's 50% import taxes, 30% alcohol taxes, VAT. So it became like a big deal. And like, well, why do you sell it so cheap? I'm like, because I have to drink it. And that's the weirdest part about the whole thing is if I want my own beer, I have to go to the retail store and buy it. And so it's like it's not like I could just go to the brewery and get a keg or get a 12 pack. It doesn't work that way. So
You think
it's
you'd know a guy.
yeah, but it's a very expensive import license. So I let them make their money.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I did take a look at your website and everything else too, just doing as much research as I could, and and the camel icon that you put on there seems to be done tastefully. And you're not making a caricature out of it like Joe Camel or anything's kind of silly. Uh, but it is an icon that I can't speak for everyone around the world, but when I think of the Middle East, I'm thinking sand. I'm thinking the what I know about the cultures. I'm thinking camels. I'm thinking dates, and so uh, it is just it, it seems like it could be a stereotype unless it's not. Um, but
Yeah, and I don't think it is. And I mean, one of the things that we've done, we did it one time on beer. So all of our beer cans have the same labels. Um, all of our spirits bottles have the same labels, and then we just change kind of the colors and the location of different things. But
mm,
the beer cans are all like identical, and then the camels kind of act out scenes, and but all those scenes that they're acting out are things that people who live here interact with on a daily basis. So people started to really catch on to that, and they can see um, kind of the inside joke that we're putting into it. And then
yeah,
when they realize that, hey, we're taking that inside joke and you can get it in the Himalayas, you can get it in Brazil, now you can get it in Djibouti, you can get it in Tunisia. And they're like, well, they're exporting kind of what we're doing on a daily basis. And like, I would say most of our beers, our American customers have no idea what those names mean. Like, because it's not part of their everyday. Like, if they go to their local
yeah,
brewery, they'll know what those names mean. They're probably in on most of the jokes. They're
yeah,
probably at the brewery when the joke happened. And so what we try to do with all of our names is kind of the same thing, right?
yeah.
I mean, one of the things we did early on was, I mean, when we launched, you had Trillium, you had Treehouse, you had Other Half, all these guys, Weldworks, making the big hazy IPAs, and they're all like super pale yellow. We went the other way. We made ours dark orangish red, and that was on purpose because we went and got a malt mix to make the beer look like the Abu Dhabi desert. And it was called Sandstorm, and we made sure that we matched the color of the beer to the color of the sand because I wanted people to start picking up on what we were doing and how we're trying to be local. Um, and then one of the things we did once we kind of switched over and did spirits, um, there's something here called the Camel Beauty Pageant. So every year, camels, like, people raise camels from around the region. They trek in with all their camels and they go to the very huge dunes in Abu Dhabi, just a little ways from where Star Wars was filmed. And they literally have a beauty pageant. The winner gets $5 to $10 million for the
Oh
most beautiful
wow.
camel. So we took all the attributes of a beautiful camel and we had an artist draw them, and then that now is on all of our spirits bottles because and when people see it locally, they know exactly why we did it and what we're doing, and they can see the long eyelashes and they can see the shape of the hump with the fur, and they know like all the aspects of how do you win the money is on that bottle. So it's just again like we can't make it here, but we're gonna make it as local as we can without doing it.
And that's the aesthetics that you're trying to
Yeah.
connect with people there. What about the flavor? Let's talk about the flavor. You mentioned you're making the color of your hazy to
Hmm.
kind of connect to the sandstorms and the sand and everything there. So you're kind of giving the color sense of place. And you already mentioned taking some of those ingredients, flying back home to where it's being brewed, and then shipping it back. But let's talk about those flavors and the flavor profiles and how that's connecting to the food culture down there as well.
Yeah. So so with the flavor, one of the things I mentioned earlier is, as I said, 117 to 120 different countries people live here.
Yeah,
So I have the world of cultures to play with when it comes to flavors. So we try to release beers from different countries like each quarter. So we've done a Czech Pils, we've done our Japanese rice lager, we've done German Pils, we've done Irish Stout. And one of the things that we do whenever I bring in the new beers, so about a week before I allow the distributors to put them on the shelves, is I get those beers in the hands of that community. So whether it's the Japanese community, the Czech community, and I have them try it, and I have them tell me if it tastes like home or not. And if it doesn't, then like I don't advertise it as that kind of culture. But the way that we brew and the way that we work with, so our German Pilsner, our German Lager, all the ingredients are from Germany. The Japanese rice lager, we try to be true to what a Japanese rice lager is, but then give a little bit what do you call the expat twist, whereas we bring in hops from America, from Germany, and from Czech Republic into the Japanese beer. So we try to bring in, we have all the cultures to play with, we try to bring them all in. When it comes to the local stuff, uh, it's typically going to be fruit that we play off of, fruit flavors, because it's a big part of the food culture here. Mangoes specifically is very big here. Mangoes and passion fruit are like massive. So we'll have once a year we'll have a mango festival, and you can go to any store and get like 60 different mangoes. So we have a lot of beers that play off that. If we do fruited IPAs and things, for sure we get those mangoes in there, the passion fruit in there. Um, but yeah, that's kind of I try to just go like to each culture. So we have a big contingent of subcontinent like Indian uh, customers. So we work with them and we're like, hey, let's take some of the beers that are popular in India, the Belgian-ish wheat beers, but let's tweak them for the UAE and for India and make them lighter and a bit more citrusy. And then like you don't have the big, you're not drinking a loaf of bread when it's 130 degrees outside in the summer. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So we try to do that as well. So we play with consistency, we play with flavor, we play with body, and bring it in, but bringing it in for specific people. And like I have, we like our Japanese rice lager is a very good example. All the Japanese people we gave it to loved it. There's been some Europeans, they're like, "Ah, this is not a lager," and I'm like, "Well," and I'm like, honestly, your opinion doesn't even matter at this point. Like
hmm
it's, I've already won with the first people we tested it with. Um, you know what I mean? But like, if I'm making a German beer and the Germans don't like it, then yeah, it's a big screw up on our side.
yeah.
So we're trying to be true to every individual culture and then kind of bringing it all together. And typically, the only thing we have to tweak, as I said, is it's going to be the body. It's going to be the thickness of a beer, and it just depends on. We have to try to time it between, ordering ingredients, production, shipping, and what is the weather going to be like here? Because we pretty much have two options: perfect and incredibly hot. So it's not as hard as it seems, but that's kind of what I look at when I'm building a portfolio or building recipes. And I mean, we've released in 4 years 28, 29 beers internationally, so we rotate them fairly often to try to hit those marks.
And so are you each of these beers that you brew, are you really trying to cater to the for lack of better words, the based culture?
Yeah,
Because that
yeah,
seems exhausting to me.
it is. But at the same time, it's like the way I look at it is like if I went to the beer store and I saw what was on the shelf from America, call it craft beer, which was really two brands, um, and they're both very big. And I was like, well, you know what? That's not representative of what I want to drink from my home country. And so I went and made that beer. And then so I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, these guys are experiencing the same thing. They're going in and they're like, why is the only beer that I can get from Germany the three biggest brands? Why is the only beer I can get from Japan the two biggest brands? Like, and they're both the same beer. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, there's so much diversity in every country's beer culture. Nobody else is bringing it to them. So we figured, hey, it's not. it's not overly complicated because at the end of the day, we have a portfolio, and the way I look at it is every quarter I try to release one international beer, and then a couple of IPAs, and then depending on the season, wheat beer, stout, that kind of thing. So it's just like we pick a culture, and it's if it gets to a point where like the reason we did the Czech Pilsner, because it was frankly like a couple of my friends are from that area in Europe, and they just kept telling me that hey, there's only one beer here that's even worth drinking, which was Pilsner Urquell. And I'm like, but honestly, it's not on draft, and it's most of the time skunked.
Hmm.
So I was like, well, and I was just like, well, we'll make you one. Don't worry about it. And we did, and we made it and enjoyed it. So it was like, you know what? It was here for about 9 months. We put it on the international airline because we always put a lager and an IPA, and then we was like, hey, drink it while you travel, and it'll be good. Bring it
Well,
to your friends.
and it seems like a lot of breweries will say, "Well, I want to brew this Japanese lager or this Czech Pilsner, but we're gonna create our own culture. This is our taste. This is our take on it, and and basically force the consumers to accept them or not." It sounds like you're trying to create beers that classic examples, but satisfy that specific group rather than saying this is who we are, love us or hate us.
I think we're trying to walk the line between the two things you just said. Like, for
Okay.
example, in our Japanese lager, we used a totally different mix of hops than they would ever use. But the rest of the recipe was pretty on point. The process was on point, and then we said, hey, we're going to try to expat it a little bit. We're going to tweak it just a little bit. Same thing with the Czech pills. Very basic Czech recipe, Czech process. Slightly little tweak at the end. We threw in some lemon drop hops for a couple of days on a dry hop just to give it a little bit of citrus kick. Because again, people are trying to drink it in 140-degree heat. They're not drinking it in the summer in Europe. So there are little tweaks that we do to make it here, but we want it
Yeah.
here for
Okay.
them. You know what I mean? It's not here for me. It's here for them. So if I like it, it's one thing, but if they like it, that means something. So that's kind of the way that I look at it for each one of those particular beers. Like I
And that
had a
and
couple
that's
of
fair
weeks.
because they're the ones who are paying money for it. So that's perfect.
Exactly, and I mean, like for our German lager, we did it, and it's fine beer. But at the time, we released two, what I would say is exceptional IPAs. Like we really tweaked the science behind both of them and made some really exceptional beers at that point. And I went to a barbecue with a couple of German guys, and like neither one of them would drink it after one sip, the IPAs. But then I opened the German Pilsner, and he drank a 12 pack. So I was like, hey, well, that means I did it right. You know what I mean? Like you hate the frou frou American beers, but like you'll drink the German one. Then we did it. We did a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, and that's fair. That
Yeah.
if that's almost like so you have you're coming from Louisiana, you graduated college, you're traveling the world, you are a truly a resident of the world. And so you've learned to probably speak languages, speak cultures, but now you're speaking flavor as a fluent language is kind of what it seems to me.
Yeah, I would say I can speak flavor better than any other language, but yeah, it's
But it's still a language,
yeah.
and
No, it
and
is. It
and
is. It's
and
it's a
trying to
good one.
reach out to individual cultures and say, hey, I get you. Let's communicate through flavor.
Yeah, and it's a good way to do it here because like you can go to the markets and there's hundreds of spices and teas and anything you can imagine that you can just go and weigh and bag up. I mean, it is like the old TV shows and old movies when you go to the spice markets here. Like that's what it is. A couple of years ago, we did a beer festival, like the first craft beer festival in the Middle East, and we brought in 9 brewers from the U.S. and I made sure to take them to the spice markets. It blew their mind, and then all of them left with like bags and bags of spices to go back home and brew beers with Middle Eastern flavors, whether that would be saffron saisons or we had some milk. There's a very famous milk tea here, and people tried to replicate that into beers. So it's been it's a both way thing. It's
Yeah,
not
cool.
just taking; it's also giving back.
Um, so, uh, if a traveler, if I or anyone else were to come to where you are in Abu Dhabi, anywhere in the UAE, what can they expect from coming to ultimately your pub, having a beer, and having a variety of food available to them? What kind of experience would you describe it?
Yeah, so it's a food led experience here.
I'm
It
sorry, it's
very
a
much
food.
is.
What?
Yeah, it's a food led experience.
Okay, food led.
So if you're coming in and you're just like, hey, I want to go get a drink. Okay, you can go get your high end cocktails. There's incredible mixology that's happening here. When it comes to beer, not so much. So when you go into most of the bars, and we're trying to change that, but most of the bars are going to get 6 to 10 taps, and they'll be all beers that you know about. Abu Dhabi is changing a bit faster than the rest of the region. So now that used to be the case 2 years ago, 10 taps, all the same 10 beers every bar. Now you're starting to see, we're in a few bars on draft, growing every month. We just launched our draft program about 9 months ago. There's a few craft beers that are coming in. You're starting to get some craft ciders in. So, those 10, 12 tap bars are now 15, 16 tap bars. So you
Hmm.
still get the 10 big guys, but now they're starting to add a few taps for us and for the other guys. So that's a good thing. But when it comes to food, there's anything you could ever want in the world is here. So whether it's incredibly high-end sushi that's flown in daily from Japan, or American style barbecue, or soon Cajun food. There's opening a Cajun restaurant in Abu Dhabi, so
Oh
which
wow.
will be very authentic. So and it's I mean, we're involved in kind of that design and opening. So it's Cajun led, craft beer heavy, craft whiskey. So it's a very it'll be very unique for the region. But we hope that again, once restaurateurs see that it works, they copy it and then they can kind of do it in their place. Because I think there's a fear here to move and change first because everything is so expensive.
Mm.
Like restaurant rent here is out of control. Like you're talking four, five, $600,000 a year in rent.
Jeez.
So it's at that point they say, hey, this works. People will buy, you know, a keg of Heineken a day. We're going to sell Heineken.
Yeah.
Whereas like, well, you know what? You put any other international lager in there, they're going to buy that keg a day because that's how many people come in. You know what I mean? It's not nobody's clamoring and coming to your doorstep for Heineken. But yeah, so you can get that. Dubai is a little bit different. Dubai, I would say, is again much more diverse on food. You have more options. When it comes to alcohol, much more on the mixology side, wine side. Mixology probably the best place to drink or ways to drink. Wine would be second. Beer to me in Dubai is very low. There's some specific structural reasons for that, but it's very macro heavy, probably more so than any other country in the world. Um, yeah.
Well, what about the distribution process? Is it fairly democratized where, smaller can find, space to or taps, or are they getting squeezed out by the larger, more investment heavy breweries?
Yeah, it's a very weird place. So it's almost impossible to distribute here, mostly because of the logistics and the shelf life, shelf stability kind of concerns that the distributors have. The population is still kind of, even though it's very international, they travel a lot. Like back home, they might drink craft beer. Here, they just don't trust it because they get so much bad product that the distributors are wary. So we got over that hump early, but getting over that hump was because we were here. You know what I mean? Like I was in their office every day, every tasting I was personally at. I mean, even to
Hmm.
today. I mean, the first 2 years, I think I met every single one of our customers personally.
Yeah.
So it was a very small operation. Like we're still small, but it was very small then. Um, there's about 10 importers in Abu Dhabi. There's two in Dubai. The Dubai ones are, one of them has a joint venture with Heineken. The other is owned by Budweiser, literally. So your chances of getting in there, you might be more successful than we are. But it's difficult. Abu Dhabi, again, because there's more competition. They are looking for that thing, but you got to really understand. I think you'd have to approach things thinking of how a distributor thinks more so than you would in the U.S. You know what I mean? Because like you're not going to sell a container of beer to this random distributor that has 4 stores in Abu Dhabi, because he'll never go through that container in a year.
Yeah.
You got to then find out who his consolidator is in your home country and try to get your pallet of beer into that container or your half pallet of beer at a time and kind of grow it. We got
And
around that by air
is it
freighting it.
worth it? Is it worth all that headache and cost just for a small
Exactly.
amount of beer?
I would say if you don't have a tie into a place like this, then no. I mean, it doesn't. But like for us, for example, like we're now in 35 countries, but and again, our distribution in those countries is very specific. It ties to the brand and the culture that we're building. We're targeting expats in all those countries. So we're in embassies, we're in consulates, we're in military bases, we're at airports. So we're not on your local liquor store in Tunisia or in Lagos. But if you go to the American embassy, you can get some of our beer because we've generally first given them our beer here, and as they travel, they're like, "Hey, how do we get this?" I'm like, "We'll find a way." Like that's been kind of our mantra from day one. Is like say yes first and then find a way, and as long
Yeah.
as we don't lose money, we do it. And it's kind of, we stumbled and we fell because I don't have a beverage background, but like, I have a customer background. I just wanted it to drink and I wanted it to be good, and we do what we can to get to that.
The funny thing is, you're not only are you not the first guest on the Good Beer Matters podcast that wanted to find good beer in a place that was hard, that made it difficult to find good beer. So their solution was to just go start a brewery, go start a brand, and do that. So apparently, there's something to that.
Yeah.
Um, to kind of start winding down a little bit, big question I want to ask you, because you've been around the world. You're obviously very heavily invested into this, the beer culture, the culture, but you have a viewpoint from around the world looking at it. But how do you define and create a really good beer experience?
Hmm. I mean, for me, I guess just given where we're at and where I've been, I mean, to me, it's about freshness and getting an intention. So like I want our beer to taste as we intend. So if we write something on the can or the bottle, like, and you taste it, you have to be able to taste it. And I know that the beer is going to sit on the shelf 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 months, and you have to be able to taste it throughout that period. So to me, it's all about like getting that part right, and then you get that part right, and once people start to enjoy it, then you can focus on the rest of it, which is kind of the aesthetics, the experience. But what we do, because again, like when we started it, we told ourselves, we're like, hey, we can't just start a beer brand. We have to build the craft drinking culture here, because as I said, like you go, it's 10 macro beers and that's what you get. And we're doing it. We did it in a country because another advantage for being here is we can't advertise at all. So the marketing spend, or market, like the marketing spend that we had to do in the first 2 years was zero. Like we could not do it. But what it meant was I had to be very much face to face. As I said, I met all of our customers personally. We did it with bottle shares and beer shares and doing beer tastings and hosting a festival, or partnering with a chef and
Which
doing a
is
beer
effective,
pairing
but time
menu, and
consuming.
incredibly time consuming. I mean, I was doing beer tastings at various restaurants, like back to back to back every 2 weeks. But I mean, when I say various restaurants, I mean, I can walk into like one of the top 50 restaurants in the world, meet the chef, and be like, hey, let's do a beer pairing. And he's like, hell yeah, let's do it. And 2 weeks later, we have an absolutely incredible meal paired with craft beer that I would never be able to do if I started this brewery in America. Like it
Mhm.
wouldn't happen. You couldn't walk into the Four Seasons, talk to their head chef, and like get a perfect menu after literally like 5 sips of beer.
Yeah, and
So it's
the beer programs in places like that are they have usual suspects, and it's all about the wine and the cocktails anyway. So
exactly. But then at the next week, we're at you know Black Tap doing a beer pairing with bar food and burgers, and then a Mexican restaurant. We did one with, or we were working on one now with a Japanese ramen restaurant. So it's kind of just building experiences. To me, it's about people are familiar with food culture, and they're familiar with enjoying food with people and doing all of that here, especially diverse. So I want to just tap into that, and once you can just say, hey, beer also works with this, right?
yeah,
Then they're hooked, because they can't tell you, oh, I don't like it, I don't like this drinking culture, when hey, you just, it's not a drink culture, it's a food culture. You're bought into the food thing. I'm just adding one extra ingredient to it.
yeah.
And then so it's, to me, it's been a that's been the most effective way, and really the only way we were able to market for like 3 years.
Well, and I do understand from a restaurant point of view. It's like I'd rather sell wine and spirits than beer because I'm going to make more money. But
Yeah,
but consumers are going to spend less money with a fancy meal and beer, but more people drink beer around the world than anything else. So it's going to connect with people, even though you're not going to make quite as much than if you sold a $100 bottle of wine, but you're going to connect people more. And that's just a theory I've been working on, but it seems pretty sound thus far, and it sounds like you're confirming that.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, the other thing is it's a unique experience. I mean, how many places in the world offer wine tastings, right? And with food pairings, like almost any restaurant that has meat, you're like, oh, do you want the prepared wine with it? But
Yeah.
when you walk in and we tell people, hey, we're going to this, Michelin level restaurant, and we're going to pair craft beer with the same food and show you how that works together. And you're
What?
having, double IPAs with dessert, and it blows their mind. And these kind
Yeah.
of events we were doing it, they sell out in 24 hours. Like that's just because it's unique. If I were to do the same thing with wine, it would take like I don't even think it would sell out. spirits, if I'm doing Scotch, because we're also involved in the spirit side of it. The bourbon events, those things, again, unique here. Boom, people love it. They want uniqueness. That's what I think people want. Nowadays, particularly after COVID, I think people are wanting more experience and uniqueness in that experience. And then, the same old stuff is gone away. You spend a couple years at your house, just seeing your family, the
Yeah.
same old. It's like, hey, I wanna get something different.
I love you, but I need to go look at a different face.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to kind of start winding this down officially now. So the questions I ask every guest is, if I could make you the king of the beer world for one day, starting tomorrow, you get to be king of the entire beer world. What would you change? What's the first thing you would change?
Beer. I would make everybody ship cold, end to end cold chain, because I think we're cheating customers when we don't do it. And it's not very expensive. People tell you it's very expensive. It's not very expensive. It's 30 cents a can. And I
Wow.
think every customer in the world for fresh beer would pay 30 cents.
Uh, yeah, they wouldn't even know. Well, if we're paying, used to pay $4 a beer, now it's $6 a beer. It's like, as long as it's good,
Yeah,
I'll pay an extra quarter. Yeah, that's a
exactly.
good one. So at the end of that day of being the Royal Highness of beer, you get to go anywhere in the world to have a meal and a beer. And you've probably already done this. Where would you go and what would you have?
I've been me and my team. We've been talking about going to this place a lot because I've not been to Europe on any beer adventures. So it would either be Pilsen, just to see the history and to really try those beers fresh, or Belgium. I think the beer culture in Belgium, I think, is very um, it's kind of what we're pushing to be, not to make Belgian beers, but the way that they do it, and they're very local and they're very unique, and everybody has their own style, and every beer is made in a certain way. I think, so I'd say probably one of those two.
Interesting. Yeah, so what would you
Yeah.
eat and drink?
Well, either one of those places would be a lot of pork, I think. Because
And
again, when you take it away from somebody, that's all they crave. So yeah, that's
yeah,
kind of what it would be. Yeah.
yeah, fair enough. Um, so another big question: why does good beer matter so much to you?
I mean, like, to me, it's not hard. Like, and I mean, I don't. I'm not trying to downplay and talk bad about anybody else, but like making beer is not hard. Um, you just got to care. And to me, I think when people care and they put their best into it, it becomes good beer.
You can
And the
tell.
fact that, like, yeah, and I've traveled around the world and I've drinking a lot of bad beer. And once I figured out how to make beer, and then I'm like, wait a minute, this is not that hard. And I'm like, it's before you think it's like it's behind the magic curtain, and there's all this crazy things that people do, and there is, and that will make it great beer, right? There is exceptional and great beer that people are doing shit that I could never imagine. But to make a good beer that'll just make somebody that'll blend into the event that they're doing, to blend into their day and make it just a little bit better. You just got to care, you just about what you're doing and have a little bit of pride in it. And so I just think it should be like the starting point should be good beer. I don't think there should be any such thing as bad beer. It's the same thing with certain restaurant dishes. Like, I mean, uh, again, stupid one, but like French fries, the easiest damn thing in the world to make. Why do we have bad French fries? Like, it's because the
That's a
person
really
making it
good
just
point.
doesn't care. You know what I mean? Like, they just
That's a
don't
really
care.
good point.
So it was. That's kind of the way I look at it.
I love it. And I've never heard that and that's said so eloquently before. It's like there's no excuse for going anywhere and having bad French fries. I can
Yeah.
make better French fries at my home tonight, easy. So there's no. We should never, ever, ever have bad French fries. Same thing with beer. I love that.
Yes.
For anyone who's curious about your story, wants to find your beer, where can they go?
You can go to sidehustlecraft.com. That's our website, or Side Hustle Brews on Instagram. Those are the two places to contact me, to contact us. I manage the Instagram account myself, so if you message me, I'll respond generally in a day or so. And then our website has the whole story, the details, a link to how you can get our beer in the U.S. through our partners Bavana. So they handle all of our production and distribution and kind of the mail to order in the U.S. And then if you're international and you're interested, just reach out to us. As I said, if there's a way, we'll find it.
Yeah, cool. And actually, it was Aaron Gore at Bavana that linked me to you. So I'll see if I can. I'd love to taste some of the beers that are coming out of the U.S. but heading to
Yeah.
like specifically designed for Abu Dhabi. But that's a great way to do it. Last thing before we sign off, is there anything you want to say? Any calls to action or words of wisdom?
No, I mean, I think it's a great conversation. Thank you very much for having me. It's always, fun to be able to talk to people who know about beer and beer culture and be able to have this conversation. I guess the one thing I would say is just because I'm going to assume, again, I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm going to assume most of your audience is American
It's
or
equally
Western,
international. It's mostly American,
Western.
but
Okay.
it is
So
international. I'm very
I would
proud of
just
that.
say people need to be wary when they make assumptions about other cultures when it comes to beer and drinking, right? Like, so there's a lot of questions, a lot of comments that we receive, and I know there's other breweries in the region that receive them that are really ignorant about just like, oh, you can't drink there. Why would you ever do this? It's not in with the religion, but there's a religion, there's a culture, there's a people, there's all these different things. So just be curious, just ask questions, and then I think together we'll all make better beer. But to me, that's been the biggest thing we've noticed, particularly because there was a time we were hiring a new brewer and we put it out where we were, who we are, where we sold, and then just the vitriol that came back online about
Wow.
just the region itself, like which didn't really happen. And I was like, hey, we're making beer from the Middle East, like, and it was just instant. So it would be for me, it would just be like, hey, look, it is a global phenomenon. It's the oldest beverage. It started in the Middle East, so we're just bringing it back to where it started. You know what I mean? So let's just be less angry and have a pint together. That to me is it's a better way to do it.
That is a great way to sign off. Chad, thank you so much for coming on to the Good Beer Matters podcast. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing, where you're doing it. This is a perfect example of why I set out to do my quote unquote virtual tour around the world, just to understand how people are enjoying beer, connecting with each other through beer, through food, and it sounds like this is the perfect place that has it, is doing it right as much as
Oh,
I
I
can
appreciate
anyway.
that. Yeah, we do our best.
All right. Hey, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
If beer is a representation of culture, can we rely on beer to be the ambassador between cultures? Can the fusion of flavors guide our way as we find a peaceful and joy-filled existence? This may be too much to ask of a beer, but I'm grateful for breweries like Side Hustle for giving us hope. In the next episode, we go to Latin America to hear a story about some buddies and a surf trip that inspired a new beer experience. I'm on a virtual tour of the craft and culture of beer around the globe. I've put Good Beer Matters on video so I can take you along for the ride. If you know of a person, a place, or a beer story that needs to be told, let me know. Meanwhile, grab a beer, hang out with friends, and let your world open up. Thank you for listening. Cheers.